Well, we've got questions here for Julian Assange from Sri Lanka, Bahrain, Malta, Hong Kong and New Zealand. We'll get through as many as we can in the next half an hour. First things first, though, let's bring ourselves up to date on the day's main news, starting in Thailand, where thousands of people are fleeing the capital Bangkok, which is being threatened by severe flooding. The city's main river has risen to record highs. So far, more than 360 people have died in Thailand's worst floods in decades. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court says talks are being held that could see Saif al-Islam Gaddafi surrendering for trial. Luis Moreno Ocampo says talks are being held through intermediaries with the son of the former Libyan leader. The head of the European Bailout Fund is in Beijing, hoping to persuade China's government to help solve the Eurozone debt crisis. China says it's willing to help out, but only if the likes of Brazil, India and Russia also chip in. And 16 countries which have Queen Elizabeth as their head of state are to change their laws of succession. The rule that sons take precedence over daughters when succeeding to the throne will go, as will the ban on a monarch marrying a Roman Catholic.
Information is power, and the question is, who has the power that information brings? Madison said that if you are to have a democracy, then the demos, the people, must have the power that information brings if they are to control their own destinies. And that is the case here. Individuals, social security numbers are simply not important in holding power to account, but the inside activities of the State Department and military organizations and oligarchs and so on is important to hold those powerful figures to account.
But the question here that Justin is focusing on is whether you believe all information does belong in the public domain.
It's not a matter of that. There are different responsibilities. So your doctor has a responsibility to not release your records into the public domain. Publishers like us have a responsibility to hold power to account. And so we have a responsibility to release information to the public domain. In the end, our entire civilization, insofar as it is rational, is based upon an understanding of our environment, which includes nature, and it includes the political and economic actors within our environment. We must understand our environment if we are able to make sensible and rational decisions.
If you would like to speak to Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, you can call him. Country code 44 2070 83 72 72. More calls coming in from Switzerland, Denmark, Algeria and Afghanistan. Julian Assange is live for the whole hour on today's World Have Your Say. We'll do our very best to get through as many points and questions as you are sending in. Let's bring in Hassan to speak to Julian Assange. Hassan, you're in Dubai. Tell us your question.
Mr. Assange, if you're arrested, do you have plans in place for someone to take over at WikiLeaks?
Thank you, Hassan. When I was put in prison for 10 days last December, WikiLeaks published more per day, as my staff constantly remind me, than we did when I was not in prison. So we do have a sophisticated international network of people who are dedicated to carrying on our work. Of course, as a founder, I am some sort of spiritual figurehead or centralizer in this organization, but our people have been through a rough time in the past couple of years, and most of them have survived that, and they are very dedicated, and they will continue on the mission
and Hassan,
for as long
I'm curious,
as possible.
sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Assange. Hassan, I'm curious, do you see this as being Julian Assange's organization, or do you believe it could survive him not being able to work for a period of time?
Well, I mean, he's the founder, so he's, in a way, I tend to see him as the backbone of WikiLeaks. But WikiLeaks is a very large organization. I believe that there are attempts to bring him down, and there are hopes by those who want to bring him down that if Julian goes down, then WikiLeaks goes down. So that's my concern.
Thank you very much for getting in touch, Hassan. And just before we go to the break, Julian Assange, this is all about you, isn't it? You're even selling T-shirts with pictures of you to raise money. Isn't this entire organization built around one person?
Whenever people cannot respond directly to powerful content, they try and attack the messenger. In WikiLeaks, that is no exception. They have tried to attack the organization, and they have tried to attack the principal visible figures within the organization like me. Now, one way of attempting to delegitimize what someone is saying is that they are saying what they're saying not out of conviction, not out of something that they truly feel or an intellectual concept, but rather that they are simply doing it for the fame and the money. But we can go back, in my personal case, and look at my activities for 20 years. I have been doing this for 20 years, trying to protect the rights of speech and to protect the rights of people to have privacy through cryptography against state spying.
If you're watching us on BBC World News or streaming us at bbc.com/news, Julian Assange is live with us for the entire edition of World Have Your Say. You can tweet us using the WISE hashtag, call us, text us using the details on the screen. Hassan, thank you for your question. I can see Harry joining us live as well. We'll find out where he is and what his question is in a moment's time. I can also see a message from Martin in London. But let's break for a couple of minutes before rejoining Julian Assange. Our guest on today's World Have Your Say is the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. Many of you are tweeting us, emailing, texting, calling and getting in touch through Facebook. If you want to call us, it's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. Julian Assange has agreed to answer any questions you would like to ask about his work and the work of WikiLeaks. I can see recent calls coming in from Mauritania, France, Ghana and Canada. First of all, though, here's a message from Martin in London who says on Facebook, "Somewhere there is a line in all walks of life. WikiLeaks stepped over the line and in the process lost a great deal of support and goodwill. Will you recognise this point?"
WikiLeaks is an organisation which has generated tremendous opposition as a result of exposing powerful groups. Powerful groups are able to project their voice in all sorts of ways throughout society, and that includes through the press. Now, some of the press consider themselves, in addition to their closeness and proximity to the very power that they are meant to be holding to account, our competitors, in part because we are simply producing information that people want to read, and so we are a press competitor, but also a social competitor. That is, for those parts of the press, such as the Guardian newspaper, who consider themselves to be in the social position where they are pushing forward the values of the Enlightenment, our organisation is also a competitor for reputation in that environment. So we get all sorts of attacks, and it's important to actually look at the primary source for any sort of report.
But you must
go to our website or go directly to the people who were directly involved and look at their agendas.
Surely you accept when you see organisations like Reporters Without Borders saying they can no longer support WikiLeaks because you didn't redact the names of some informants. Surely when you look at the hundreds, if not thousands of emails you received
Reporters Without Borders
that was the wrong to do.
No such thing. In fact, Reporters Without Borders ran a WikiLeaks mirror for over 6 months, mirroring all our material. These sorts of spins on what people are actually saying, we're just taking one little thing out of context or one little quote, is something that happens all the time when you are in the business of holding extremely powerful organizations to account. There are always counterattacks. Look what happened when Barack Obama was going up for election, the sort of attacks and smears that were on Barack Obama. They were everywhere, right down to his birth certificate. The same thing happens to us. Barack Obama had an entire democratic organization to produce counter-propaganda.
The point that Martin's making, and maybe we can put this to the test with our viewers around the world, is that many people supported you when you went into partnership with The Guardian, with the New York Times and so on. But when you put all those cables online without redacting the names of some informants, you lost a lot of support. Those of you watching around the world, did you have that reaction, or do you accept Julian Assange's arguments that the work of WikiLeaks remains valid, including that latest decision to put all those cables online? Do email us, worldhaveyourSay at bbc.com. You can tweet Julian Assange using the WISE hashtag. Let's pull up a message for you from Baghdad. This is Lubna. She's a young doctor living in the Iraqi capital. She says, when you released a video showing American soldiers shooting innocent Iraqi civilians, were you hoping to bring justice to the victims or just simply defy authority? Well, before you even answer that, I'll say that the Americans would dispute they were killing innocent civilians deliberately, but that caveat aside, if you could answer the question, it would be appreciated.
We even sent people down to Baghdad. The #1 journalistic prize winner, Kristen Hrafnsson, who is our spokesperson for Iceland, has won more journalism prizes than any other journalist in Iceland. We sent him to Baghdad together with Ingi, one of our camera people, to visit the families, to get the original documents and so on. You know, this is a process which is very moving to us personally, moving for us personally. But it is not just that we are affected by the work that we do. Rather, we do have a particular goal. We do understand the importance of true information to be out there, true information which holds these abusive powers to account. It has always been the only thing. It has always been the only thing that has truly held these powers to account. And that is our mission, to get the hardest information and release it to the public. Because otherwise we can just rely on the BBC, or we can rely on some other group. If the information isn't hard to get, we are a specialist organisation.
What I would like to ask you is that
in getting the hardest
Mr.
information.
Assange, let me ask you this, though. A recent documentary about the New York Times shows the then editor of the newspaper discussing with colleagues, and some colleagues say the way that you, WikiLeaks, edited that video made the Americans look far worse than if you watched the video in its entirety. I'm curious to know, when you edited that video down, did you do it with a certain goal in mind?
Complete propaganda. This is propaganda that is precisely the same as claiming that Barack Obama's birth certificate was forged. We released side by side our original source tape and a reduced version that had all the boring bits cut out. But even in our so-called edited version, the first 12 minutes is completely uncut, and that's where all the violence takes place. Okay. We just added context, who was there, what sort of people, what were their names, and then did a few flashbacks in the end to look at particular details. But the first 12 minutes, where the most violent confrontations occur, is completely uncut. So once more, propaganda by the New York Times and by others in an attempt to delegitimize the severity of the information being released.
If you're just turning on, Julian Assange is live with us on World Have Your Say, answering questions about his work and the work of WikiLeaks. You'll know that over the past 2 years we've discussed his actions many times on this programme. Now he's joining us live to answer questions from around the world about what he does. Let's bring in Jeremy in Perth. But first of all, Mahfouz is with the World Have Your Say news team, where all of your calls are getting answered. Mahfouz, give us an idea of some of the questions being called in.
The latest calls have come in from South Africa, Malta, Malaysia and Sri Lanka, and the main themes on the phones are support for Mr. Assange along the lines of he's the messenger, don't shoot him. And some have called us simply to thank you for your work. The criticism that is typified by this question from Javed in Afghanistan, he asks you, do you ever think of the implications for the people you expose in your documents? And this specific question from George in Bethlehem, Julian Assange, you gave a talk at Cambridge University this year. My son was at the talk. He requested that no one record the talk. How does that reconcile with the quest for transparency?
I didn't request that no one record the talk. It is the Cambridge Union's policy that no one record the talk. And in fact, I even spoke about that during the talk. So that's a mischievous question. In relation to do we ever think? Of course we think. This organisation is all about trying to achieve justice for people. And over 5 years of publishing in 120 countries with material from over 100 countries released by us, millions of documents, no government official anywhere claims that the results of our publishing activities has led to any single person being killed. Now, that is not the case for the New York Times. That is not the case for the BBC. In fact, there are claims, and I think even acceptances, that the mainstream media has, through various mistakes, certainly probably not intentionally, led to people being killed. It is not yet. It is not yet the case for WikiLeaks. I'm not sure that the BBC would accept that its actions have led directly to the death of anyone, but that's a side issue. It has inflamed riots that it was aware of would be inflammatory that led to people. Let's talk about you and talk about WikiLeaks rather than the BBC, and bring in Jeremy, who's called us from Perth. Jeremy, you're speaking to us over the internet, and what's your question for Julian Assange?
Mr. Assange, what role are the Australian government playing to help prevent your extradition to Sweden?
Thank you. The Australian government is playing no role whatsoever to help prevent my extradition to Sweden. But the Australian people are another matter. within Australia, and I am an Australian citizen, my personal approval rating, according to statistics, is twice that of the Prime Minister. So we have to look at the government of a country versus its people and differentiate the two. Back last December, the Australian government tried, and it publicly announced that a whole of government investigation into WikiLeaks and me personally, whether they would cancel my passport, all the intelligence agencies involved and the Australian Federal Police. All that was cancelled. The Australian Federal Police found I had no case to answer. All those investigations, at least publicly,
very recently,
were
Mr.
cancelled.
Assange, we're hearing from the Attorney General of Australia, Robert McClelland, who says you may have identified an individual within Australia's intelligence service. It's a crime to do that or to help identify an intelligence officer, and he's looking into that. Isn't it understandable the government might have concerns about an Australian doing those kind of things?
Well, Robert McClelland stated that they would not be pursuing that matter, and rightly so, because the Australian people object to it.
Jeremy, thank you very much indeed for getting in touch from Perth. Julian Assange, thank you very much indeed for answering the first half an hour of questions here on World Have Your Say. We're staying with us for another 30 minutes. Wherever you're watching in the world, you can call up and speak to the founder of WikiLeaks. It's country code 44 2070 83 72 72. You can also use the WISE hashtag on Twitter or email worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. I do have one apology to make, possibly because so many people are trying to do it, but the live stream online at bbc.com/news is currently not working. We'll do our very best to sort that out in the near future. Speak to you in a couple of minutes. Atkins, our guest on World Have Your Say, is the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. For a full hour, Assange is answering questions about himself and WikiLeaks. If you want to put a question straight to him, you can tweet now using the WISE hashtag. You can get in touch at facebook.com/worldhaveyoursay. You're also very welcome to call. We're live. The number is on the screen throughout the show. We've got a very long list of issues that you're raising, so let's get straight on with the programme. Julian Assange, founder of WikiLeaks, remains with us live on World Have Your Say. Awede in Nigeria would like to ask you, he gets in touch through Facebook. My president, good luck Jonathan of Nigeria, has described WikiLeaks as beer parlour gossip. What is your take on that?
Thank you. Look, all these politicians who are criticised in our material or whose abuses have been uncovered try and distract from the message. It's the same old game. Now, particular newspapers may choose to concentrate on the more salacious angles, but actually that's not a bad way of leading in to material that is more complex and is deeper. Der Spiegel did that, for instance, on our initial release with their front cover. Quite a few leaders and salacious statements made about them, but open the cover and it leads into something more serious.
But nonetheless, what you're sharing in terms of diplomatic cables is information that was not meant for public consumption. It's gossip, it's conversation between colleagues, isn't it? Does it necessarily tell us that much?
Well, it's not conversation between colleagues. It is official US ambassadorial reporting back to the White House, back to the CIA, back to the State Department, and so on. Now, it might just be gossip if it was said in a beer parlour, but when it goes back to Washington, it becomes something of geopolitical significance.
Awede in Nigeria, thank you for asking the question. Julian Assange, thank you for answering it. More comment coming in from Zimbabwe, Chad, Singapore, the Faroe Islands, also from Afghanistan. Arash Bahar has just got in touch to ask you, Mr. Assange, are you aware that you've put a lot of lives at risk, especially in Afghanistan? Lots of double agents were killed by the Taliban after WikiLeaks released those cables. Do you know that? Do you have any more information on it?
Well, my understanding is that is simply false. In fact, NATO told CNN in Afghanistan that they were not aware of anyone who even needed to be moved. There's no active claim by the US government that anyone has been killed, despite intense motivations to make such a claim. So I believe that to be false.
Here's a message for you from Yusuf in Bahrain. He says, your website says you have information on which companies and individuals are behind the economic meltdown. When are you thinking of releasing the rest of the cables?
We have over 100,000 pending publications. We are now in a position, as a result of this economic blockade, an extrajudicial, illegal under European law economic blockade, that we are not able to continue publishing in the way we have been until we raise more funds or we knock the blockade down.
It's worth saying you believe it's contrary to European law. That's not been found in a court of law yet.
Well, the European Commission is investigating that, and a number of experts have come forward to say they also believe it is contrary to European law. Once we are able to establish our position in terms of publication throughout the coming year, then of course.
But you're scuppered, aren't you? Because you haven't got enough money to take on all these different legal fronts, and in the end, you're not going to be able to get your point across whether it's right or not.
We may be in that position. I believe that as a result of the fight that we are about to push forward on, that we will in fact knock down this blockade, that it will be seen to be the politically motivated attack that it is, and it will go. Now, if it can't, if we are not able to defeat it, of course, every other organisation, Greenpeace, Amnesty, other press organisations, run the risk that they too will be economically attacked as a result of publication. Then the only thing left to do is to set up an alternative financial regime which is independent from interference by big American corporations.
If you use MasterCard or PayPal or Visa or Bank of America, I wonder if you object to their actions in the way that Julian Assange does. By all means, let him know. Tweet using the WISE hashtag, or you can email worldhaveyoursay@bbc.com. Let's bring up another message for you. Claire on Facebook, she doesn't say where she is, but she says, are you aware of how diplomacy works and how what you do could be jeopardizing the behind-the-scenes diplomatic work that goes on between countries?